If you were here this morning, you'll know my name's Sam Goodall. I'm Chief Executive of Cambridge Cleantech. I'm just chairing the day and then handing over to David, who's going to go through the session. We've got 4 presentations from the speakers here, so welcome to Emma. Oh, sorry, yeah, okay, I'll get the hang of it. So Emma, Brian, stand up, Brian, Richard, and Jonathan. And I'll hand over to David, who will run the session. Thanks very much.
Okay, good morning everybody. Hope you're well and welcome to this session on retrofitting residential, delivering the opportunities. Firstly, just to quickly introduce myself, I'm the Chief Executive of the Retrofit Academy Community Interest Company. We are a developer and deliverer of training into the retrofit sector. We've trained 7,000 retrofitters since 2019, and we've developed most of the qualifications that are now being used to upskill retrofitters around the country. So it's great to be here. Residential retrofit, for those who don't know, is the process of decarbonising our houses. We want to make those homes healthier, warmer, and of course lower carbon. It's characterised by the improvement of the building fabric in terms of the walls, windows, doors, roofs, etc. The building services and the installation of renewable heat and power sources into those homes. So, but with upwards of 27 million homes in the UK and short of 26 years now to deliver legally binding targets, it's fair to say that our progress towards decarbonising our housing stock is somewhat slower than it needs to be. And it is indeed an elephant in the room for those tasked with delivering net zero. Government funding is driving niche markets in areas like social housing and the fuel poverty sector, but there are supply and demand side challenges that are preventing widespread retrofit in the mainstream. And with no major retrofit programme trailed by any of the major political parties, there also appears to be a leadership vacuum around the subject too. And of course, lobbyists are pushing their own technologies, such as heat pumps, in favour of orthodoxies such as fabric first. And of course, concerns about quality of delivery are never far from the surface too. So the question today is, how do we solve a problem like retrofit? Will market forces ride to the rescue? Will the British public's climate conscience drive mass uptake of measures? Will technological innovation ride to the rescue? And will a mass market for social housing retrofit drive wider uptake? We're here to discuss this today are 4 excellent and experienced speakers. We have Emma Harvey-Smith, the Chief of Staff at the Green Finance Institute. She'll be looking at the challenges and opportunities around investment. Brian Berry, Chief Executive of the Federation of Master Builders, who'll be looking at the skills challenges. Richard Ellis, Director of Sustainability at Peabody Housing Association, who'll be looking at asset management and implementation in social housing. And Jonathan Holyoke, the Global Engineering Net Zero Programme Director at Atkins Rail, who'll be looking at data and many other things too. So without further ado, we're going to have 4 quick-fire presentations and then a discussion. I'm sure you have a way of asking questions and we'll work that out as we go. Emma, over to you.
Hello, welcome everybody. And what I'm going to talk about today, as Brian mentioned, is I'm going to talk about how do we catalyse investment into net zero. And I'm trying to sort of focus today around the barriers and the solutions. So let's break us down first and then we'll build ourselves up. So what are the key challenges to decarbonising the UK's building stock, in particular financing the decarbonisation of the building stock? Well, there's 3 key challenges. The first is the low levels of demand for energy efficiency and low carbon improvements. And this is a result of policy uncertainty in terms of timescales to decarbonise our homes, low levels of consumer awareness, and all of that combines to make it a challenging environment for financial institutions to innovate and invest into net zero, because there's no certainty that there's demand and there's no certainty of when there will be demand. The second barrier is that there's a fragmented and underscaled supply chain, and Brian will talk to us a bit more about how we can overcome that later. But what we find as a result of that is it's challenging for financial institutions to form partnerships with the retrofit industry because there aren't those players with critical mass that can support those collaborations. And there's also classic trust issues with the supply chain that can make it challenging for financial institutions to partner because of Section 76 and Section 75 and Section 56 of the Consumer Credit Act, which can make it quite risky for financial institutions to partner with the supply chain. And the third challenge is mainstreaming the green finance environment. So we have a growing market with over 60 green mortgage products and a growing number of green loans. And we're starting to innovate solutions that can fill those gaps, such as things like property-linked finance. But these markets are currently underscaled, they are not mainstream, and so we need to find out ways to scale those markets. But we also need to upskill the advisors who inform consumers on the different types of finance they can use. How do we get financial advisors, mortgage brokers, to be able to advise and point their customers towards the most appropriate solutions that support their green objectives? And the last point on this is we need to have financial solutions that help people across the full spectrum of credit. So yes, people who are able to pay may be able to access private finance, but what about those who are further down the credit scale? What kind of grant support is available to help them? So in terms of solving these challenges, there's a number of things we can do. So on the demand side, we can bring in long-term policies that provide certainty to the market. We can deliver national awareness raising campaigns, and we can create really simple retrofit customer journeys through one-stop shops and streamlined integrated customer journeys. In terms of the skills, again, Brian and others on the panel will talk more about this today, but we do need to build more of those partnerships between the retrofit and the finance community, breaking down what the perceived barriers are to collaboration and have a really honest conversation. And there does need to be finance provided to the industry to help them upskill and transform. And last but not least, what do we need to do for the scale the finance sector? Well, we need to undertake keyhole surgery on existing finance markets. How do we tweak existing finance markets to support green outcomes more effectively? We need to innovate new solutions that will plug the gaps where traditional finance won't go. And we need to start using blended finance. This is where you use a small amount of public capital to crowd in private capital. We've seen this done incredibly successfully in Germany with the KfW and their green investment schemes. How can we replicate that in the UK? So that's everything from me today. That's my quick whistle-stop tour, and I will hand over to Brian.
Good morning, and it's really great to be here to talk about retrofit, and in particular, I think, in terms of how small builders can actually be part of that solution if we're going to create a greener Britain. So, for those of you who are less familiar about the Federation of Master Builders, we are a trade association for SME building companies. We have members all across the UK. All of our members are independently inspected, and we have a 14-point check. So it's not an organisation for any builder. We only want the best builders in the FMB. One of the problems in this country is that anyone can call themselves a builder, which gives rise to a poor reputation of the building industry. I just want to touch on the problem that we're talking about in terms of retrofit, because we have in this country 29 million homes. And if we are going to deliver a cut in carbon emissions by 2050, it's absolutely essential that we make our homes greener and more energy efficient. We have one of the oldest and leakiest housing stocks in Europe, which means it's quite a big challenge, but also I would say a great opportunity for the building industry in terms of upgrading people's homes. And we know actually that greener homes, more energy efficient homes means actually reducing fuel poverty and also providing decent homes for people to live in. I think those measures should be overlooked as part of this discussion. So the question is, in terms of the retrofit market, which is worth between £3.5 and £6.5 billion a year, is what is holding us back? Why aren't we getting on and actually making our homes greener and more energy efficient? Well, there are challenges on both sides, both in terms of industry and consumers. And if we look at the industry challenges, one of the problems we have is that the industry is very fragmented. It is not unified. 99% of the industry is made up of SMEs and micros who operate independently. So we have a very fragmented industry. We are unclear about the standards needed or expected. We know that in social housing, there's a PAS 2035, but for the owner occupiers, they can rely on Trustmark License Plus. And in some cases, my members are working with clients and learning as they go
So there is a lack of clarity in terms of the standards expected. There's no clear market in terms of driving up training. There is a skills gap in our industry, which needs addressing, because actually very few qualifications take into account the need for retrofitting. All this needs to be addressed. And from the consumer side, it is very confusing for consumers wanting retrofit, who to go to. There's a lack of information. And then who do they trust? Because it is difficult to determine which contractors could do the work to improve their homes. As I mentioned, anyone can call themselves a builder. There are too many cowboy builders in our industry, which is again very damaging to creating a robust retrofit market. And critically, I think there are too few financial incentives for homeowners. At the moment, there's incentives to remove your gas boiler, but if you're thinking about the fabric of your building, there's nothing there to help you. So, if we're going to start tackling this, there does need to be some form of intervention. These are the results of a recent survey that we did of our members, and you can see that actually 26% said there was a lack of a clear pipeline of work for retrofit. The availability of finance for consumers was identified and as holding back retrofit, and obviously no demand there for small builders. The lack of consumer awareness of the benefits of retrofit still needs to be explained. And I think actually the term retrofit sometimes doesn't help. We'd be better talk about upgrading people's homes. I think it's a language that would resonate more with the public. And then there's a lack of capacity and skills in the workforce at 16%. I won't go into detail on this, but the industry has come together through the Construction Leadership Council to advocate a long-term plan for retrofit, the National Retrofit Strategy, because you can't look at things in isolation. You can't look at the financial incentives, you can't look at the supply side. You need to look at all these issues in terms of standards, the financial incentives, creating consumer demand. We need to be looking at all of this together, the 8 points which are identified in the long-term National Retrofit Strategy. From the builder's point of view, the F&B has been looking at this now for a number of years. We have argued for building regulations to be updated. We've argued the need for a license to trade to actually eliminate the cowboy builders, which will, obviously is very important. We've got competent builders to do retrofit. We've talked about improving the training for retrofit as well. And of course, we've called for a national retrofit hub, which I'm pleased to say has been set up. It is industry-led and is actually trying to share best practice across the sector. And there are 6 working groups producing some very good work. And finally, on the licensing side, as we approach the general election, the FNB will be calling for licensing of construction companies. We see this as a game changer in improving the reputation of the industry, but also to ensure that any retrofit work done will be done by competent builders. Thank you very much.
Morning, everyone. I haven't got slides. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to talk for a bit. So I'm Richard Ellis. I'm Director of Sustainability for Peabody. One of the areas I look at is decarbonising our homes. We've got 107,000 homes going from things that were built last year to, 160 years ago. We've got 78% of our properties are EPCC, but we've got to retrofit 87,000 homes over the next 26 years. That's going to cost us about £1 billion to do. Now, with short-term financing that we're seeing from government, with SHGF and various other schemes, that really makes it difficult for us to plan long-term. And then it makes it difficult for the industry to then resource that up. And that's, I think, the key for us. What we want to be able to do is get a long-term plan so we can deliver efficiently and carefully, and do the hard things as well as the easy, quick things, which at the moment we're disincentivized to do. And so we can work with our contractors, our tier 1 contractors, so that we can actually develop the retrofit, so we can prime the industry. Social housing got 4.4 million homes. we can prime the industry so that it can go out to the wider industry and decarbonise the 29 million. We use data, huge amounts of data, so that we can manage risk, manage finance, but it's a real challenge for us to access what we need to enable us to get going and actually create the homes we want for our residents, and so that we can be part of the change. But I'll leave you to the next caller, and you can ask me some questions later.
Hello, morning everyone. No slides from me either. So my name's Jonathan Holyoke. I'm from Ellis. We're a global engineering consultancy, about 40,000 people worldwide. And I look after our global program to help our clients decarbonise. So I see quite a lot of different themes coming up across our global business. So I'll take a sort of bit of a top-down view about what we see in the retrofit market, just to give it a slightly different perspective. So for me, this is all about how do you get this industry to scale? And then a lot of these problems hopefully will go away. So we know the government incentives are sort of falling back. We know, as we said, we've got a real challenge around data. How do you visualize the challenge? How do you then take concrete action to take steps you need to take to move forward? Both in terms of planning, but also cost, I think, is still an untapped area here. The investment landscape is complex. You've heard a bit about that. The supply chain's fragmented. But I think fundamentally, the really interesting part about this challenge is it's about real people. So you have tenant-landlord dynamics. You have people, who in social housing who have house load issues, but also, want help with their bills. So you've got to really think hard about, the end customer, the citizen, if you like, through all of this. And I see, some reasons for optimism of a certain type. So the business case feels hard. We work with lots of clients around it. We see people wanting to do the right thing, fabric first, look at the heating first and get that really, great kind of overall holistic outcome. But increasingly, as costs sort of fall for renewables, there is a little bit of a dash towards renewables and whether you can just move quite quickly towards electrification as well. And I think that's quite an interesting space. One that does open up a different type of opportunity, and it pulls you more quickly towards a line of sight towards a return on investment, which is, I guess, part of the way to unlock that scale challenge that I was talking about. So, how can you turn banks of housing into mini power stations? How do you make distributed data centers work within houses? How do you, perhaps more prosaically, create really efficient asset management at a portfolio level, so that you can get some efficiencies as you look at large stocks of housing, such as Peabody's. And ultimately that comes down to data, that comes down to understanding what you've got, how it's working, and how as you scale it you can create some efficiency in a net zero neighbourhood, for example, and perhaps create some sort of off-grid solutions which can then sort of have peer-to-peer trading, and you can start to build out some revenue streams that perhaps weren't there before, selling your electricity back to the grid, some battery storage that enables you to sell back at peak times, help perhaps for your residents on their bills, those sorts of things. So I think that's a really interesting space. It's a space that requires not only data, but great coordination as you try and build up the right sort of plan. So people like the Connected Places, Catapult, are doing great work in this space. It requires the right infrastructure. So there is a sort of space where you are going to need better grid connectivity as well. But ultimately, it requires you to have great connection to your customers and get that engagement with real people that I talked about at the start. So they may want lower bills, but a lot of people will want help with black mirrored. They therefore might want to go fabric first as opposed to go straight for electrification. So how do you get that affordable, viable, socially optimized portfolio of buildings? And for me, that's about sort of getting a grip on the data and starting to plan at a slightly larger scale than we do at the moment. So perhaps that's a great segue for the wider conversation. Thank you.
Was Charles saying that clear?
Yeah, thank you very much for those sort of whistle-stop insights into your words. Do we have microphones to take questions from the audience? I just need to check we've got microphones first before I... Right, okay. Right. We're a bit later. So what I'm going to put some questions to the panel just as we're waiting, but if I could just get some hands. Okay, so I've got one here, there was one there, okay, and there. So we'll go there first, because that lady was first. I'm just going to ask a question first, so bear with me, and then we'll come here and to there. So a question for you to think about, and we're going to answer at the end, okay, which is, what would you like members of the audience to go away and do as a result of this session. So what's the one takeaway you'd like them to put into practice? A web action or engagement or anything you like that each of you would like them to do. We'll take some questions now. We can then.
Hi there. My name's Helen Burridge. I work for a collection of councils across Hertfordshire. We are currently trying not to reinvent the wheel, so we are taking another council's retrofit advice and basically control, find, replace council name. But what we are finding is we've got 500,000 houses in Hertfordshire. Ultimately, the summary is it's complicated, and although there are archetypes, every house is going to have variations and fabric and condensation and all these different complexity. Summary is get a retrofit assessor. So I go on Find a Trader, and there are 12 in Hertfordshire. How do we square the circle between trying to skill up the trade, trying to inform householders, and trying to encourage people to do the right thing and not make irreversible impacts on their houses that are right for the next 10 years, but not for the next 50 years?
Okay.
It's hard.
Okay. There's a couple of questions in there. We'll leave it at those couple, if I may. I'm going to come, I think, to Brian and the skills question. So, how do we find enough retrofit assessors from, building up from where we are, what is clearly only 12 in Hertfordshire?
Yeah, it's a major problem in terms of skills in the building industry. We've got a shortage. And the fact you mentioned about the retrofit coordinators, I think stems from the fact, particularly for those in the owner-occupied sector, that there's lack of demand. So there's the industry is not responding because there isn't sufficient demand to trade. During the pandemic, people were wanting home extensions, they wanted the garden room, and so builders were concentrating on doing traditional RMI work. They weren't focusing on retrofit. They were responding to consumer demand. We need to actually, I think it needs to be government supported about a long-term plan to upgrade our existing housing stock. We need to get consumers asking for that demand. We need to actually see an increase in the value of homes of higher EPCs, so that it becomes more attractive for homeowners to invest. Then you'll get the industry responding. It's this chicken and egg problem that we're facing at the moment.
Okay, fantastic. Helen, could you come and have a chat with me afterwards, please? Because I've got some suggestions. Has anyone else want to comment on this question? Richard, I think.
Hi. I suppose it's more of a question back to you in terms of what levels are you looking at? If you know your housing stock and you know your data, you've got that portfolio knowledge, there are simpler things that you can do for sections of your stock that will get them to where they need to be without having actually to go through retrofit assessors and other bits and pieces. Might only be a small percentage, but you can work it if you segment it.
Okay, I think that's going to pick up afterwards rather than have a discussion with. Thank you very much. There were two more questions, so we'll come to the gentleman there first and then to you.
Hi, Rupert Fawcett from netzerohome.uk. My question is a slightly fundamental one, I suppose. Isn't fabric first and talking about retrofit first rather a barrier to getting where we need to go? So we've recently taken a pretty standard block cavity house to net zero carbon and net zero cost, by the way, relatively easily. But when we look back and saw what did the goods, what really delivered, it was the bolt-ons, it was the PV, the heat pump, which delivered 80%, and the fabric work, which was multiples more expensive, came in at maybe only 20%. So really, shouldn't we be focusing first on those cheaper bolt-ons, which are much easier for the householder, than on the fabric retrofit?
There's a hornet's nest if ever there was one. So we'll come to Emma first and then to Jonathan.
Thank you. So I'm a banker by background, so I'm not going to come in with sort of very technical comments on that. But in terms of how the finance industry views that, I think there is a general consensus towards the fabric first approach. And some of the work the GFI did looking at building renovation passports identified that you need to basically, for every household, you need to have a step-by-step plan for what's required. So maybe typically fabric first is best, but so long as whatever activities you undertake are not going to knock out a future activity, that's what works. And then you can build a financing plan for every individual around that. So I'm not going to dive into the hornet's nest, but having that really clear plan of what happens is important, not just for the household, but also for the finance industry.
I'd just like to echo that, because in the National Retrofit Strategy, we have called for each home to have its own passport, because it is very expensive to have a whole house retrofit. In its measures to be like, oh, can you hear me? No. Incremental measures which would be outlined in the building passport, I think is the most sustainable way to go forward, because it is going to be very costly.
And Jonathan, please.
Thanks. So I agree, there's a lot of engineers in my firm who are definitely agreeing with all those statements. I do just think there's a slight hint of realism here, that how to just get started quickly and make some quick progress. And I know you should do it in the proper sequence and the rest of it, but the paybacks are pretty long on Fabric First at the moment. They're feeling quite challenging in the market right now. So, ways in which you can make quick progress, particularly as costs are, pretty amazingly low on PVs are interesting. I think we just need to think about how we create the right blend and perhaps get cracking on some of these scalable opportunities first. So, hornet's nest, bit of caution, but I'd maybe a little bit more towards the speaker's point of view there.
Okay, fantastic. There was a question here, please, and we'll come to you next.
Thank you very much for that insight. I think this is a question more for Jonathan and slightly for Richard. You mentioned data as the starting point. So one, in your experience of working with your clients, are you collecting data? And if next, yes, you are collecting data, as you mentioned, the starting point, then what next? And on the other side for Richard is because you mentioned EPCC across your hands. But we all know EPCC is just it's a badge, it's on theory, how the property is, like a car. The brochure can say anything, but the way you drive it is actually what makes a difference. So you have EPCC homes, but are they being run the same way? I mean, are you sharing that level of insight with the end user, saying that your EPCC home is being used like an EPCG home in action? But over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so in whichever order you like.
So why don't I go first? But so we do collect data. We collect it on clients' behalf. So I'm going to pass pretty quickly to Richard to sort of talk about, how it's used. But I think, we can see some real opportunities to do a lot with it. Optimize the portfolio, work out what way you should invest first. Slightly back to the previous question. Work out how you're going to get a return on that investment. So the cost aspects, and also work out, how you're going to get to that net zero target, so the carbon trajectory you're going to get to. So, the more data you have, the more you can do it through archetypes, if you like, rather than individual assets. Back to the Hertfordshire example, that can be really challenging in this space. So, there's a bit of more scale, more data is better, and you can have more effect, and you can also manage your asset base much more efficiently for your clients, which is what I'm going to...
Thank you. Just to go back and go, I agree with everything you said. It also enables us to procure more effectively. If I know that I've got to replace 20,000 windows with triple glazed, I can actually go out and do that, and I can more effectively procure. So data is a really powerful thing for us. It's also something we're being asked for a lot from the finance markets, ESG loans, all asking for data. And unfortunately, with EPC, that's what the government tell us we have to report on. And that's what our funding is related to. It's not the right measure. I think kilowatts per meter squared is the right measure, but that's a whole different argument. So we do use the EPC. We do share that with our residents, and we use it for planning. What I'd like to see in the new iteration, but I think with the home energy model, is actually bringing in energy use as well as the fabric efficiency. I think that will give us a much better idea of where to prioritise, but we have to choose something, and so effectively that's what we've chosen.
Good, fantastic. Just going. Can I have a show of hands? Any more questions? Thank you.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you for your presentations. I was just wondering, what do you suggest to residents who want to have their housing retrofitted and refurbished, and they bring in retrofit engineers to say that it can be done, but the councils and the housing associations and developers still prefer to demolish their homes and building high-rises, or that in some cases haven't been built well? Because there seems to be like a disconnect between what consultants say and what the advisors who are very close to councils to provide social housing, but in some cases demolishing up to build affordable housing. Because in some cases, and I don't want to embarrass Richard because he seemed like a nice guy, but the residents of Lesner's estate, one run by Peabody, have had to occupy empty homes and recently make a protest outside the mayor's office in tents to get someone to listen to them to say that we want our homes, or not we, but the residents want their homes retrofitting. Thank you.
Okay, so perhaps Richard, could you comment on that, perhaps that last bit, and then Emma, perhaps on the demolition versus rebuild argument?
Yes, so I'm not too close to it, but the residents were balloted and they did accept what they wanted to do. And from our point of view, we're here to create homes that last for a long time and to be as affordable as possible. So we have to look at what it's going to be like in 60 years' time. We have to look at the cost now, and then we have to make a judgment. We always look at it individually. So there are other estates where we've just retrofitted them, but that was a decision that was made there.
Okay, thank you very much. Emma?
So I think one of the terms that's become incredibly popular in the last few years is embodied carbon. I think if you went back 10 years ago, you wouldn't hear people talking about that. But embodied carbon is basically the carbon that's tied up in the construction of a building. But it also needs to take into account the carbon involved in demolishing the building that was there before. So we're starting to see not just developers, but also the finance community looking at actually what is the embodied, and councils, looking at what is the embodied carbon associated with either retrofitting a property or with demolishing and rebuilding. Now, I would point you towards some fantastic research done by Glasgow University, which analysed what the emissions would be associated with demolishing some existing tenements in Glasgow and rebuilding versus retrofitting. And it came out that retrofitting was the better option. And we're starting to see councils really take this into account with planning decisions. And likewise, financial institutions, particularly when they're looking at development finance, are also starting to look at that from some of the sustainability criteria. But agreed, it's something that needs to be more at the forefront of these conversations.
Fantastic, thank you. So we had two more questions. Gentleman at the back there, please. Oh, sorry, no, actually you were here. Let's go here first, and then we'll come to you.
Hi, sorry to take us back to a topic I think we've already addressed, but do we think the fabric first or heat pump first argument is helpful in the context of this discussion? Because I think we've got Retrofit Academy and the Retrofit Assessor Programme, we've kind of all recognised this is like a multifaceted problem. And do we think we just need to put this argument down because it's not helping us? I think everyone agrees that insulation in eco has been woefully inadequate for decades, but they are individual properties. They're going to have individual problems and specific opportunities. Is this helpful?
Okay, thank you. Is it helpful fabric first versus other things, or should we be technology agnostic? Brian?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think it very much depends on the building itself, and that's why I think each home should have its own passport. It's not been helped, I think, by government policy putting the incentive on removing a boiler and putting in a heat pump. It's very much focused on that as the solution to retrofit and not thinking about the fabric of our homes. And it's a great shame that it wasn't seen as fabric and the heating systems we're seeing in parallel. So I think it's been distorted, and which for owner occupiers, that's the only incentive they have, is to remove their gas boiler. There's no help if they want to actually address the fabric. So it is national policy that needs to change if we're going to create a more fabric first approach.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. We should put it down.
David, can I come in with a quick extra point as well? So we've been talking about, do you decarbonise for fabric first? Do you do, low carbon technologies? I think the big elephant in the room that we haven't spoken about as well, which admittedly wasn't in the session title, is adaptation and resilience. It looks that the science and the IPCC is saying, we're pretty much on track for a 1.5 degrees plus environment. I think you only have to cast your mind back to the summer last year or 2 years ago with the heat wave. We have an an incredibly unresilient built environment as well. We need to adapt both for flood risks, for overheating risks, for subsidence risks. And so actually, when we're having a bit of a argument about do you put heat pump in first or do you put energy efficiency in first, actually, you've got to have a whole overlay of adaptation as well. And that's not being picked up by pretty much all the market at the second. So that's just to throw another bombshell into the debate.
Okay, fantastic. I think we should have had a conference session on this topic. So there's two quick final questions at the back. Let's stand in next to each other.
Thank you very much. There are particular methods, and I know about these because I'm a retrofitter, is to show that in fact if you retrofit a house, its actual value on the open market does not increase as a result of the retrofitting. When we looked into this and why and how, why not? No, because the person buying it would save money. It was found that because we have more people and we're not building houses fast enough. Okay, so there's a continuous shortage of houses, and so people are bidding to buy a house absolutely the most that they can. So when we're dealing with individual people to buy a house, they have no money left with which to go away and think about for themselves, all individuals, to think about carrying out energy efficiency in their house. It'd be very nice if the house they bought was already done, but not otherwise. Now, we looked into this very hard, and it turned out that there was a way to put over something to the government such that everybody could have their houses retrofitted when it changed hands. And this cost nothing to the buyer, to the seller, nothing to the finance company at all. And
sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, could you hold the
question?
And could we come to the question?
Right.
Thank you.
The question straight away is, have you heard about this method? Because we've had great difficulty getting this through the politicians.
Okay, what's the method called, please?
It's called Innovation Net Zero. It's called Housing Net Zero.
The question is, have we heard about this, and is it something we should be doing more of?
I'll give you the data. Not cheap.
Has anybody heard of it, is the question.
I'd be very happy to pick up on this with you, but you do raise an important point. We're not building enough homes. Last year we built 160,000 homes, which is about half the government's target. And of course, people are very, very focused on trying to secure a home, a rented home, or on the housing ladder. And that's detracting from the retrofit debate as well. So I'll happily pick up for you.
I was just going to say, the UK Green Building Council has put something in their manifesto, and I think that something related to stamp duty is probably the way to go on that. We build a lot of homes as well. We want to make sure that we're housing for residents, but yeah, I think we've got to do something to make sure that people, when they sell the home, can actually invest in it.
John.
Just really quickly, I haven't heard that, but we do build new social housing, and I think one of the things we do is we do it in a modular way, so you can add on, increasing elements of decarbonisation as you go, depending on your budget and the kind of your OPEX requirements as well as everything else. So I think there are interesting things in the new build space that would speak to that point, but harder retrofit-wise.
Okay, I think you'll have a queue of people to talk to you afterwards. So, final question at the back, please.
Hi, I'm Richard Williams from Taylor & Townsend. I've missed the presentation because unfortunately I was watching Claire Gattino get interrupted by, I think it was 7 protesters protesting about Rosebank. So without commenting on that, if you could successfully influence the government, either the current one or a new one, what's your 10-second view on what you would like a new government to commit to unlock the vast opportunity we have here?
It's a great question. We're going quick fire in the order of the speakers on that. So, Jonathan, to you first.
I want to see it happen in real life, practically at scale. So I want to just pick an area and do as much as you possibly can and see the potential for large-scale retrofit. So a pot of money and a real innovation drive to show what's possible.
Okay, big push. Richard.
Step change in their minds and, a 10-year funded agreement.
Okay, consistency.
I'd like the new government to work with the industry and implement the national retrofit strategy.
Policy certainty. We want long-term policy, clear dates, clear incentives.
Joe, that couldn't be any clearer, I don't think. So that just leaves us with the question I put to you at the start, and we're going to go and reverse it. I'll start with you, Emma. So what is it that you want members of the audience to go away and do? So what action or engagement or activity should they go away and do that will have meaningful impact beyond this event?
So I was going to say any financial institutions, come and have a chat with the GFI. But actually for everybody in the room, I would say go and check out your EPC and see what you can actually do on your own property and start your own retrofit journey today.
Fantastic, right?
There's a general election coming up. I'd like you to speak to the parliamentary candidates and argue for upgrading of existing homes as the best way to tackle fuel poverty, improve our homes and cut carbon emissions.
Be open and be flexible. There are huge amounts of solutions out here. There will be the right one somewhere.
Last word, Jonathan.
Think about the sort of people who are really struggling, people who've got real difficulties in their homes. There are some things that can be done really easily for them, and if you're talking to politicians, I think that's a good place to start.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that brings us to time, so it just leaves me to thank the panel. If you could give them a round of applause, it feels...
I mean,